Hey everybody, Robert Rambles here, and welcome. Like many people during the recent WoW content drought and other goings-on at Activision Blizzard, I've been taking time to dive into Final Fantasy XIV again, and I'm currently working my way through its epic main story quest. Today, I want to talk a little bit about Final Fantasy XIV, what distinguishes it from WoW, and what are some of the most impactful differences to me personally as a player. If you're new to the channel, I've played WoW since 2006, but before I ever knew what Warcraft was, I was a Final Fantasy fan. From Final Fantasy VI on the SNES, all the way until Final Fantasy IX on the PlayStation, where I feel like the series really hit a peak. So I feel like I have an equal love of both worlds, and I'm in a good position to make some comparisons for anybody who's looking at FF14 as something to do that is familiar, but that isn't World of Warcraft. Fair warning, I am more of a story and lore focused player, so a lot of my thoughts and comparisons are going to be on those sorts of things, and not so much on high end gameplay like hard mode raids, class balance, and things like that. The first thing I want to talk about is our character. So in Final Fantasy XIV, your character is positioned as an adventurer who comes from a faraway country. Your character is new to the land of Eorzea, and since as a new player you're also new to Eorzea, this helps to quantify the sense of being overwhelmed that can happen when we enter a new game world for the first time. And in game, you're immediately assured by the characters around you that the basics are going to be quickly and efficiently spelled out for you to get you on your way in your journey. I also really appreciate being framed as an adventurer who's out to do good in the world and to help those in need. In WoW, I constantly feel like my character is simply some mindless grunt who's willing to do any deed, whether it be good or evil, for a little bit of experience and silver, whether it's sifting through poop for items or murdering an entire troll village. A lot of times, our character in WoW doesn't seem to have much of a moral compass, if any at all. From these humble beginnings as an unknown adventurer, our character slowly builds their reputation as being someone who's resourceful and helpful to others. We start interacting with more important people in our faction, and we take on more important tasks as the stakes are constantly being raised as we progress through the story. It does start a little bit slow at first, but I feel like building up our character in this way just feels really natural and helps you get really immersed into the character and into the world. You're not being thrown into any big world-ending events really quickly, and so yeah, it just feels good. Talking about our character from a gameplay perspective, in Final Fantasy, your character can master any or all of the jobs, which are the classes in the game. This is regardless of your chosen race, so you don't have to worry about alts. You can level all the classes up on one character and be able to switch between them freely to suit your needs or what you want to do in the game. Next, let's talk a little bit about the game world. Firstly, the graphics. Final Fantasy's graphics are completely different than World of Warcraft, and some people might like it, others might not, and for some it might just take some getting used to. To me, game graphics are something you can enjoy or not depending entirely on your own artistic taste. So I'm not going to talk too much about the graphics or the stylization because I feel like everyone is different and has their own preferences. What I will say is that for my part, I've really enjoyed the amount of detail that Final Fantasy XIV puts into its environments. From city streets to guild hall rooms to shops and dungeons, the amount of minute detail is incredible, and all of it serves to create a world that feels believably lived in. The cities and rooms and buildings all have this immense feeling that just seems like the proper scale for a true living world. And it makes it so easy just to get immersed, running around, taking everything in. You really think to yourself at every turn, yeah, I could imagine people living in this world. I could imagine living in this world too. To me, you only get that sense from a fully realized and painstakingly thought out fantasy world, and it's been a real joy. From my very beginnings in World of Warcraft, I've always thought that some of the cities and many of the smaller settlements just seem to lack space. The insides of buildings and things like that lack some of the small details that might help it feel more lived in. But overall, it almost feels like the structures, the buildings, the rooms, they're just not to scale. To me, WoW characters are meant to feel larger than life, and I've always wished that the in-game buildings and design would simply just be on that larger scale. Let's take a look at the common room of an inn in Final Fantasy XIV. Look at all the detail and the NPCs that we see just going about their day. Now let's take a look at the inn in Stormwind City. There's just a big difference in the design and in how it makes you feel about the game world, in my opinion. On to the outdoor environments. In Final Fantasy, these were rendered with the same amount of detail and realism as the cities and the buildings, and while I think they're incredibly pretty and a joy to explore, it's true that they aren't all as visually distinct as zones in World of Warcraft. However, the more realistic style and blending of zones aesthetically is another thing that lends to the immersion in Final Fantasy. You could feel like going from zone to zone that the world just makes sense. A counterpoint is the sort of immersion breaking thing that can happen when you transition from, say, the Swamp of Sorrows into the Blasted Lands in WoW. There's just kind of a wall that happens when suddenly the entire environment and ecosystem is startlingly different, and sometimes that can be immersion breaking. Now let's talk about the core of the Final Fantasy experience, the quest. Probably the most distinguishing difference between Quest and WoW and Final Fantasy is that in Final Fantasy, from start to finish, the main story quests are clearly broken out from the side quest and from your class quest line, something that WoW only started doing in the Shadowlands. To level through the game, you can basically just do the main story quest and follow a coherent narrative all the way from the start to the finish. That's another thing that WoW only started recently with the Shadowlands campaign quest and breaking those out. And there's a complete storyline for each class in the game. Think Order Hall quest from Legion, but deeper and more elaborate. In my opinion, it's the delivery of these story quests that really go the extra mile to make them much better than Quest in WoW. In WoW, when we're talking about even the main campaign quest, or any quest at all for that matter, when you pick up a quest, you're given a wall of text, and you click accept. Sometimes, more recently, the NPC might have a couple of voice lines that they spout out after the quest has been accepted that mirror some of what was in the quest text. In Final Fantasy XIV, main story quests are all delivered as scenes, with dialogue that you click through, instead of a single wall of text. These scenes use unique camera angles that are not just the default action camera, and there's often movement and action. You get to see facial animations and characters actually interacting with the world. Obviously, this is a much more immersive way of delivering a story via quest. Important cutscenes are voice acted, even in A Realm Reborn, and the amount of quality voice acting grows with each expansion. There's a common saying in WoW which is that nobody reads the quest. And for the most part, that's true. But the quests aren't really presented to you in a way that would make you interested in them at all, whereas in Final Fantasy, seeing the cutscenes play out really encourages you to read the text and to understand and get into what's going on in the game world. And that leads us right into talking about the story. This is probably the biggest difference so far between WoW and Final Fantasy XIV, or at least, maybe it's just the most important one to me personally. The narrative experience in FF14, the way you're introduced to the world, how your character interacts with and develops over time, is unquestionably better than the story that you experience in WoW. Now, don't get me wrong, I think that the lore and universe building done in WoW is incredible. So when I say story, I'm talking about the narrative that your character experiences as you play through the game. In the past, in WoW, each zone was basically a collection of small-scale stories that in a way told the tale of a particular area and the things going on in that zone. The game didn't necessarily have a point-to-point narrative that you were following as a character, but more like you were experiencing some broad brushstrokes of a world story being established. If we look at more recent expansions in WoW, we can see a more coherent story being told, but the path we take through that as a character is often fragmented, convoluted, or both. And many major narrative events only occur in media that is outside of the WoW game itself, which means you'd have to read a book or watch a cinema outside of the game to know exactly what's happening or to understand what's currently going on. In fact, most of WoW's best storytelling happens in its novels and cinematics, and not at all inside of the game itself. Even when WoW utilizes in-game cutscenes more recently, using in-game character models that are slightly enhanced, they aren't envisioned or executed nearly as well as the scenes found in Final Fantasy from the very beginning. As far as the quality of the story itself, I'll withhold my opinion until I've finished all the MSQs and I've really seen how things come together. But as far as presentation, cohesion, and immersion go, Final Fantasy has WoW beat easily. I feel like FF just takes more time to let its characters and world grow. to let the plot line simmer and evolve over time, really earning those big plot moments or character moments that often feel very rushed in WoW and sometimes completely unwarranted. As I said, World of Warcraft has amazing lore and amazing universe building. It just seems like the same writers that build the lore and the universe, they're not the ones who are writing the quest or really paying attention to how the story feels to play through as a character. I can't say a lot yet about the lore and universe building of Final Fantasy, but it's something that I'll probably have more to say once I've completed all the MSQs in the game. Now let's talk a little bit about the gameplay. I'll just come out and say it. The combat in FF starts out pretty slow. Final Fantasy has a longer global cooldown, which means at least initially you're going to feel like you're pressing less buttons than you would in WoW at a comparative level. And the way the characters move and react to inputs also feels different. I wouldn't say it's sluggish or slower, but it definitely feels different than WoW. I still prefer that snappiness of WoW combat. It always feels great to hit your buttons in WoW. But I feel like the longer GCD in Final Fantasy and things like ability combos really make the combat engaging, especially as you get into higher levels of classes and open up all of your abilities. All of the spell and attack animations are also top notch and visually distinct, and they're just a joy to watch even for hours on end. Another thing I'll say about gameplay in Final Fantasy is that I feel like it respects my time more as a player. What I mean by that is that the quest objectives are often more reasonable than ones you might find in World of Warcraft. So instead of being told to go kill 20, 30, or 40 things, or pick up 15 or 20 things off the ground or from enemies, the numbers in Final Fantasy are much lower than that. You might be asked to go kill 3 to 8 things, or to pick up 3 or 5 things off the ground, and things like that. And I feel like when you're working in the realm of kill quest and pickup quest, making those numbers lower is just a way to better respect the character. Nobody wants to go kill 40 things for a single quest. There just isn't really something enjoyable about engaging the same enemy over and over so many times. And it just makes the pacing that might otherwise feel slow, it really picks that pacing up when we feel like the quest objectives are just more reasonable. As far as class design, I really can't say too much yet, just because I haven't played around with enough of the classes. But something that I appreciate about Final Fantasy is that each class isn't 3 separate classes. Each class is its own class. It has its own identity, its own abilities, and I feel like not having each class be 3 different classes due to talents probably makes the game a lot easier to balance, and probably keeps classes at a much more even keel than what we see in World of Warcraft. As my journey through Eorzea continues, I'm sure that I'll have other thoughts and comparisons on Final Fantasy XIV and World of Warcraft. To wrap things up for now, I'll say that I'll probably always be a WoW player. I love the universe, I love its lore, and its characters. It's also a game that's a part of my personal history, and my memories. But even at an introductory level, FF14 is doing so many good things. And I plan to get immersed and to fully enjoy my time in the world. That's really all I have to say for now. I hope you guys enjoyed the video today, and if you're interested in Final Fantasy XIV or World of Warcraft, consider subscribing to the channel, as I plan to have more discussion videos and comparisons going on as I continue that journey and learn more and more about the world of Final Fantasy. Until next time guys, take care of yourselves out there and take care of each other, and we will see you back again real soon. Bye now.